in the first section of Bereshis, the first paragraph of Bereshis, on the creation of the first day, the word or, the word light, is written 5 times. And the Medrash Rabbah says that the 5 times the word or is written correspond to the 5 chumashim, which makes sense, because light doesn't only mean this type of light. Enlightenment is also light. So our enlightenment, our divine enlightenment, comes in 5 books, 5 chumashim. And the Medrash goes on to explain how each reference of or corresponds to the Sefer. The 4th mention of or in the pasuk is in the verse Vayavdel Elokim bein ha'or u'bein ha'choshech. God divided the light from the darkness. The Medrash says that corresponds to Sefer BaMidbar. The Sefer BaMidbar is the division between the generation that left Mitzrayim and the generation that came into Eretz Yisrael, which was not meant to be, because it was meant to be that the Jews that left Mitzrayim themselves were to go into Eretz Yisrael. But there were a chain of calamities that resulted in that not happening. And these are the parashas we're reading these few weeks. Beha-alotcha, Shlach, Korach, and ultimately in Parshas Chukas, the Torah informs us that the generation that left Mitzrayim passed on, and the new generation now is going to march on to Eretz Yisrael. But the beginning of this process of transition, the beginning of this chain of catastrophes, which brings about results in the Yotzei Mitzrayim, those that left Egypt not going into Eretz Yisrael, begins in this week's parsha. So the Havdalah, the division between those that left Mitzrayim and those that went into Eretz Yisrael, that process of division, that process of separation, begins this week in Parshas Beha-alotcha. So anybody that has a familiarity with the Chumash knows that Beha-alotcha is really a transition parsha. This is where things begin to turn sour, things begin to change. And I talk a little bit about the first 2 episodes, the first 2 calamities, and I'd like to offer a conjecture with great trepidation. I don't know if this is the pshat, but it may be an added insight that certainly is a valid point in any case. Whether it has anything to do with the parasha, I don't know, but I think that the lesson we need to learn is certainly applicable. It says in the verse as follows, that on the 20th of Iyar, the Jews broke camp and they began to march to Eretz Yisrael. And it says, Vayihi ha'am kimis'ayninim. The people were as complainers. Rad oznei Hashem. This was evil in the eyes of the ears of the Lord. Vayishma Hashem. God heard their complaints. Vayicharapo. And he became angry. Vativar bom eish Hashem. And a divine fire burned against them. Vatoichal b'psei hamachane. And it consumed at the edge of the camp. The people came to Moshe, they begged him to pray. Moshe prayed for them, and the fire sunk. Fire died down. So the place was named Tav-Eira. Tav-Eira means a fire. Ki va'aravam eish Hashem. The fire of the Lord had burned against them. So this is the first episode, the first calamity of people who are mis-onanim. Let's understand that word, mis-onain. An onain is a person who is in a state of sorrow, a state of mourning, because of some loss. So, for example, when a person loses a loved one, a close relative, a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a son, daughter, or a spouse, that person has the legal status called onain. He's a mourner. What is a mis-onain? Now, we know that in biblical Hebrew, when you put that prefix, mis-onain, so it means a reflexive action, something you do to yourself. So an onain is a person who has suffered a loss. A mis-onain is a person who makes himself into a sufferer. Because if you work yourself up to the point where you feel you've suffered a loss, even though the reality is you haven't, you're not an onain, you're not a genuine mourner, you are a mis-onain. You're a person who made himself into a mourner. And sometimes we all do that from time to time. There's something that may be a slight inconvenience, and all of a sudden we work ourselves up, and we feel that the weight of the world has fallen on our shoulders, so we are mis-einim them. So the Jews were mis-einim them. They were complaining. So there are consequences. A fire broke out, Moshe davened, and the fire disappeared. What were they complaining about? Torah doesn't say. No, not yet. Not food yet. So Rashi says...
Better misrun.
No, that's later. That's the next story. Rashi says they were complaining about the weariness of the journey. Traveling is hard. Traveling is hard. I myself traveled today. I was in Atlanta last night and this morning, and I flew back. And I'm tired. Traveling tires you out. On top of everything, I sat next to a guy in the plane who just wanted to talk the whole way. He was an interesting person, but I rather would have taken a nap. But in any case, see, they were tired out from the trip. So they were complaining. How did Rashi know that? How did Rashi know that? Didn't just make it up. Because Rashi is bothered by a question. That the Jews have left Mitzrayim 13 months before. And all of a sudden they're complaining. Just now they start complaining. There's nothing to complain about until now. So Rashi is troubled. So Rashi understands it must have been they were complaining about something that just happened now. So now I understand the answer. The answer is because they were complaining about the traveling. So until now they were encamped at Har Sinai for a very, very long time. They had settled down. They came to Sinai Rosh Chodesh Sivan. They broke camp the 20th of Iyar, which is a year minus 10 days. So really they were in one place for quite a long time. So they were out of shape. They weren't used to traveling. So now all of a sudden Hashem tells them to hit the road, and they're tired out. So we understand why they're complaining now. Was it justified? Was it really that bad? It wasn't really that bad. So they're called mis-einim. At least we understand why all of a sudden they're complaining. But that makes the second section more difficult. Next story. Now, Safsuf means the people that were gathered in. Rashi says these were not the native-born Jews. The Torah tells us back in Parshas Bo that when the Jews left Mitzrayim, they were accompanied by a group called the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were Egyptians, and they were accepted as converts by Moshe Rabbeinu, and they traveled along. So they didn't belong to any shevet, didn't belong to any tribe. They joined, they tagged along. And they were a source of trouble throughout the generations. We know that they were the ones that were responsible for the golden calf. So here they come up again all of a sudden. They have a desire. They have a desire. And they say, Mi yachilenu basar. Who's going to give us meat to eat? You want meat? And they say, we remember the fish in Egypt, and the cucumbers, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, the garlic, and now all we have is mun. Mun on Sunday, mun on Monday, mun on Tuesday, all we have is mun. Now the Torah tells us the mun was a perfect food. The mun was heavenly. But they were complaining. So Moshe says to Hashem, Lo maharayos ala abducha. Why did you do evil to me? Why did I not find favor in your eyes? Why did you put the burden of this people on me? Did I conceive them? Did I give birth to them? Where am I going to have meat to provide for them? So Moshe Rabbeinu seems to lose it at this point, which is really very peculiar, because this is the one place in the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu seems to be at a total loss. Because every other time of crisis, Moshe Rabbeinu prays on behalf of the Jewish people. But here all of a sudden, Moshe Rabbeinu, it's almost not becoming. It becomes like about himself. Like, why didn't you have mercy on me? Why did you put me in this situation? Am I responsible for them? Did I give birth to them? I have to carry them? He says, where am I going to give meat for them? You have a problem? Ask the God of Baruch, send meat. The only way I can quell the revolution is by giving them meat. So Rebbeinu Shalom, please send meat. What's going on over here? But getting back to the real question at hand is this: that why all of a sudden? In other words, if our conjecture is correct, that Rashi understood that the first episode of the Misoinanim was a complaint about the weariness of travel, and the question that was bothering Rashi is, because otherwise, why all of a sudden? So here, the question bounces back. They've been eating man for just over a year. The man started falling 1 month after the Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is 1 month and 5 days, 1 year and 5 days later. This is the 20th of Iyar. The month started falling the 15th of Iyar. So they've been eating man for a year. All of a sudden, 1 year and 5 days later, all we have is man. We remember the good things in Egypt. We had meat, and we had garlic, and we had vegetables, melon, cucumbers, fish. And now all we have is man. It took a year. A year to complain about this? I'm sure there are many answers to this question in the Mefarshim. But I'd like to offer one conjecture based on another observation, which is that in the Torah, the two stories seem to be linked. You know, in the Torah, there are spaces that divide paragraphs. So those are called parshias. So if you look at a Sefer Torah, you'll see that there are blank spaces. Sometimes the space is from the middle of the line to the end of the line. Sometimes it's a space in the middle of the line, but there are spaces which separate topics. When you have verses that are contained within one paragraph, where there's no dividing space, you assume there's some connection. So here, in this story, there is no space that separates the story of the Misoinanim from the story of the Safsuf. The two complaints seem to be linked in some way. So how do we understand that? Now let's raise another issue. Who were the Misoinanim? So the second complainers, we know, were the Erev Rav. They started the complaint. Then it says later on that the Bnei Yisrael joined them. It says, "V'asafsaf asher bekirbu esavu tava, v'yashuvu v'yivku gam Bnei Yisrael." The Bnei Yisrael also joined them. So when the Erev Rav started, the Bnei Yisrael joined with them. But who were the first complainers? Who were the Misoinanim? So here it's not clear. But the simple meaning of the verse, simple reading of the verse is that these were not the Erev Rav. Because if the Pasuk makes a point that the second complainers were the Erev Rav, the implication is the first complainers weren't the Erev Rav. Even though Rashi on this point does bring two pshatim. Rashi says in one pshat they were the Erev Rav, another pshat he says they were the wealthy Jews. Well, why the wealthy Jews? Why should the wealthy Jews complain about the weariness of the travel? It says because wealthy people are used to having things their own way. So these poor people, as we say in Yiddish, are tzaklapt anyway. They're beaten anyway. So they don't complain. But wealthy people are used to getting things the way they like them. So when things don't go the way that they complain. I had an experience once, an amazing experience. I was in New York, and I was supposed to come back, and my flight was delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and ultimately canceled. And they put us on a flight for the next day. And you should have heard the people complaining. They were complaining, and gotta be here, gotta be there. Everyone was complaining. Anyway, so I had an idea. I was thinking, I'm going to wait till tomorrow. Who knows? Tomorrow something else will happen. So I'm going to take a bus back to Toronto. I'm going to take a bus back. So I go to Port Authority, and I get in a bus. The bus itself was delayed for an hour and a half. And I get on the bus, and I figure, okay, 10 hours, 12 hours, I'm going to be in Toronto. The bus leaves Port Authority 10 o'clock. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm sleeping, and I wake up. There are lights all around the bus. There's a roadblock. This is in the middle of Pennsylvania. There's a state policeman. And the roads are washed out in the rains. So the driver calls back to New York. What should I do? So bring the bus back to Port Authority. 4:30 in the morning, we're back in Port Authority. How I got back is a long story. But the point I want to make is this, that no one complained. No one on the bus complained. So I was wondering, why was that? The answer is very simple. The people that fly are the upper crust. Things don't go their way. They complain. Who takes the Greyhound? People like me, right? The Greyhound. So it doesn't work out the way you like it. Okay. Well, it's a clap anyway. So therefore, Rashi says that the people that were complaining were the wealthier people. Right? They were used to their comforts, and things weren't going their way. They complained. Again, who am I to say which interpretation is correct? But it seems to me that the simple reading of the text should indicate that the first complainers were not the Erev Rav. Because if the Torah makes the point that the second complaint was Ha'asafsuf Asher B'Kirbo, this was the Erev Rav, so the implication is that the Misonim, the first episode, does not involve the Erev Rav. So it's a very, very curious thing going on over here. The first complaint is a complaint on the part of certain Jews, certain native-born Jews. Let's assume that. Not the Erev Rav. They complain, a fire breaks out, Moshe prays for them, the fire goes down. The second complaint is instigated by the Erev Rav. It spreads to others of the Bnei Yisrael. Moshe doesn't pray for them. Moshe is only able to pray for himself. Now, I think that if we accept this conjecture, that the first complaint was on the part of the Bnei Yisrael, and the second complaint was at least sparked by the Erev Rav, we can understand, by the way, the difference in Moshe Rabbeinu's response. Because the acceptance of the Erev Rav was a very controversial thing. If you remember back in Parshas Kisisa, at the time of the Chet Egel, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, says, go down from the mountain, lech reit, go down, ki shiches amcha, because your nation has become corrupt. You know, my wife talks to me like that. You know what your kids did today? I mean, your nation became corrupt. What's God? Your nation became corrupt. So Chazal say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, these are your people, not mine. I didn't tell you to accept the Erev Rav. Says you decided to accept them. These are your people. You're responsible for them. The Jews, those are my people. But the Erev Rav, I never told you to take the Erev Rav along with you. So if they did something wrong, those are your people. It's your responsibility. So now I understand what's going on over here. The first complainers were native-born Jews. So even if their complaint was not 100% legitimate, they were misaynim, they made themselves into complainers. But Moshe Rabbeinu was able to pray for them. So when the fire broke out, Moshe prayed for them that the fire should go down. But here, this complaint was a complaint of the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav wants meat. So now, what can Moshe Rabbeinu do? Pray to God that God should give meat to the Erev Rav. Moshe Rabbeinu perhaps felt that the Erev Rav is my responsibility. I can't turn to the Ribono Shel Olam, except I can turn to the Ribono Shel Olam on my own behalf. I can say, now listen, this is a favor not to them, this is a favor to me. They're putting me through the ringer, so at least have Rachmanos, have pity on me, and help me solve this problem. But not for them. In other words, for them, Moshe Rabbeinu felt he couldn't daven because the Erev Rav is not God's responsibility, it's Moshe's responsibility. Question?
Yeah, because he asked a question that if God wants to respond, he can respond to. Moshe says, did I conceive them? And in fact, God's answer is, yes, you did. I didn't. No, I didn't tell you to bring them.
So look, I don't want to go into the details of the argument, but the Sforno explains that the argument was really like this. The argument was that this whole thing came about because you put me in charge of the Bnei Yisrael to take them out of Mitzrayim. Moshe isn't complaining about the meat issue. He's complaining, why did you make me the Redeemer from Mitzrayim in the first place? None of this would have happened. I wouldn't have gotten into this mess had you agreed to send someone else at the burning bush. That's how the Sforno learns Pshat in the Psukim, which makes perfect sense. Because Moshe is not complaining about the fact he can't provide the meat. He's saying, okay, that's my mess. I got myself into that mess. But if you would have had mercy on me back then, I would never have been in that situation where I would have taken out the Erev Rav. That's how the Sforno learns Pshat in the Psukim.
So this is similar to what he said at the beginning in Egypt when he got rejected.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Sforno says, is the meaning of the Psukim. Yes.
Isn't there a deeper issue that the first group and the second group are not accepting Hashem's meaning, that they have to struggle, they can't complain, they have to make their way to Israel?
No, that goes without saying. That's axiomatic. That the complaints are illegitimate. We're not even questioning that, right? So we're discussing some peripheral issues first, right? Which are, in other words, who is doing the complaining? Why just at this time? We're not discussing the ethics of their complaining. But their complaining certainly is illegitimate, and God is certainly entitled to do whatever He does to them. But we're just exploring first just the technical issues. Who and why is it coming just at this time? We'll get to some of your issues. Now, so again, what is the linkage of the two stories? So I'd like to offer a conjecture, but it's based on something which relates to last week's parsha. And since we didn't have a class last week, we can turn back. There are many laws in last week's parsha, odd laws. We have the law of the sota, the suspected adulteress. We have the law of the nazir, the person takes a vow of sanctity. There's a law which seems to be a repetition of a law which we already had back in the book of Vayikra. There's a law as follows. Let's say a person steals. Or let's say a person denies a monetary claim. Someone sues him for money. I lent you money, and the defendant denies it. And he swears falsely to confirm his denial. And then later on, he comes forward and says, it's really true, I really did owe the money, I really did steal, and I swore falsely. And he confesses, he admits. So the Torah says that he does three things. First of all, he has to make restitution. He has to pay back what he owes, what he stole. Number two, he has to add 1/5. That's an extra penalty. And thirdly, he brings a sacrifice. It's called an Asham Gzelis. He brings a carbon Asham. And thereby he has an atonement. That parsha, that section, is repeated in our parsha, or Parshas Nasa, last week's parsha, with one additional law. It says, what is the halacha if the victim of the theft died and he has no heirs? he has no heirs. So you can't make restitution. He has no heirs. So what do? So the Torah says in that case, you give the money to the Kohen, to the priest. And it seems that the simple understanding is like this, that really there's no one to make restitution to. The person has no heirs. But you can't let the thief enjoy the fruits of his crime. So he has to divest himself of the money. So who's he going to give it to? The Red Cross. So the Torah says, give it to the Kohen. But that's just, in order to have an atonement, he has to rid himself of the money. Now, it's very hard to say, I regret having done the sin if the money is still gaining interest in my bank account. So that's the first thing. You can't have remorse, you can't have the forgiveness, you can't have atonement until you are rid of the money. So you have to give the money to somebody. So the Torah says give it to the Kohen. Now the question is, why is this parsha repeated? Now Chazal say a very funny thing. Chazal ask a question, who doesn't have an heir? Who doesn't have a relative? Any native-born Jew has an heir. He might not have a child, he might not have a sibling, but he has a 10th cousin. Because all Jews are related. We're all children of Rabbi Yitzchak and Yaakov. So if you don't have a child, you don't have a sibling, you don't have a first cousin, but you have a 10th cousin. So every native-born Jew has an heir. So what does it mean if the person has no heir? So the Chazal say it refers to a convert. A convert. A convert sometimes will have an heir, and sometimes will not have an heir. How so? Because the rule is, Gersh and his guy, when a person converts, this person is considered like a newborn. That's like a newborn child. He's severed all his family ties. His parents aren't legally his parents, his siblings aren't his siblings, children he had before the conversion aren't his children, there are no laws of inheritance. He's considered a newborn. If the convert subsequently marries and has children, then those are his heirs. So in the case of a convert, sometimes he'll have heirs, sometimes he won't have heirs. If he subsequently married and had children, now he has people to inherit. If he didn't subsequently marry, he won't have heirs. So the parsha is talking about where the victim of the theft was a convert. Therefore the Torah says, if he has no relatives, then you make restitution to the priest. So Chazal say that this parsha, this section in Parshas Naso is repeated because back in the book of Vayikra, it's talking about where you stole from a native-born Jew. And this parsha is the parsha of Gezel Hagir, where you stole from a convert. Now, it's puzzling. Now, if the only difference is this very technical point, that if you steal from a convert, there's a possibility that he won't have an heir, that certainly is a detail that could have been added back in the book of Vayikra. We don't need to repeat the whole parsha here in the book of BaMidbar just to add this one little detail. And secondly, where does the parsha really belong? Does it really belong in Vayikra? Does it belong in BaMidbar? It really belongs in Vayikra because it relates to a korban, because you bring a sacrifice as an atonement, so of all places, why put it here? The Sfornos is an amazing thing. The Sfornos says that the reason this entire parsha is repeated is because Gezel Hagir, when you steal from a convert, it isn't just that now there's a technicality, perhaps he has no heir. Stealing from a convert is essentially a different crime than stealing from a native-born Jew. It is a different crime. So why is that? This is what he says. He says, this convert has come, he wants to join the Jewish community. That means he has an appreciation of what Judaism is, and maybe it's even a romanticized version of what Judaism is. And he thinks, such a wonderful community, I want to become part of that. And then all of a sudden he discovers that Jews are human beings, they have the failings of human beings, they even commit sins and crimes. So what is the convert going to say? He'll say, why should I be a convert? For what? To join a nation of thieves? So this is a chilul Hashem, this is a desecration of God's name. It's a fundamentally different crime than stealing from a native-born Jew. Let's understand this deeply. You know, we talk about the idea of Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. sanctifying God's name and desecrating God's name. So we've explained many times. Kiddush Hashem means you act in a manner that gives support and encouragement for other people to do the right thing. Chilul Hashem is where it's negative. You act in a manner which weakens people's resolve, weakens people's commitment. People say, if he can do that, I can do that. That's Chilul Hashem. So there's an amazing irony that it's really the opposite of the conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom, if I ask you, what's a Chilul Hashem? What's an example of Chilul Hashem? So you would say, an Orthodox Jew gets his name in the papers. Orthodox Jew kills his wife. Orthodox Jew embezzles $1 million. Orthodox Jew commits financial fraud. And that's a Chilul Hashem. The reality is that the big crimes aren't so much a Chilul Hashem. No one of us is going to initiate a Ponzi scheme because Bernie Madoff did it. Now, the big crimes don't inspire the rest of us to commit big crimes. It's the little things. When we cut corners, so people say, if he can cut corners, I can cut corners. So, for example, when the Gemara says, the Gemara asks the question, Heichi dami Chilul Hashem. What's an example of Chilul Hashem? So the Gemara says that the great sage Rav said the following: if I would go into a butcher store and buy meat on credit, that would be a Chilul Hashem. Now, this is before credit cards. So it was down our system. You bought on credit, you expect to come back tomorrow and pay your bill. But if Rav would buy on credit, people would say, you see? He knows that no one is going to come and collect the tab tomorrow, not from the great sage Rav. So he has no intention of paying. That would be a Chilul Hashem. His intention is to pay. But if he'd act in a manner that people would say, he has no intention of paying, so if he's not, I also don't have to pay. And whenever I say over this Gemara, I always add a story I once read, that the famous painter Pablo Picasso apparently never paid cash for anything. He'd go into a store to buy a pack of cigarettes, he'd write a check. But someone asked him, says, why? He says, who would cash a check with Picasso's signature on it? So that was the Chilul Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan said in the Gemara, if I would walk a distance of 4 amos, 6 feet, short distance in the street, without saying words of Torah, and without wearing tefillin, that would be a Chilul Hashem, because I wouldn't be living up to people's expectations. That's a Chilul Hashem. If the great sage of Yochanan could do that, then I can do who knows what. Let me tell you an amazing story. An amazing story illustrates this point. There was a big guy, a big Torah scholar, living in Eretz Yisrael, the Shavina Rov. He was big. Big. And not just big. Huge. Yeah. Anyway, one Shabbos afternoon, there's a knock on his door. He opens the door, there's a 9-year-old boy standing there. And the boy says, can the Rav test me on what I learned in school this week? Well, a serious boy, student. And they want to know that he had mastered the material. Can the Rav test him? So the Rav says, sure, come in. And the Rav tested him, and he knew very well, and the Rav gave him a compliment and a bracha. And as the boy's about to leave, so the Rav says, I have one question to ask you. He says, you knocked on the door at 4 o'clock, Shabbos afternoon. Did you think, perhaps, that I would be sleeping? So the boy says, a Rav should sleep Shabbos afternoon and not be learning Torah? Didn't dawn on me. So the Shavina Rav, for the rest of his life, did not nap Shabbos afternoon. It's an amazing story. He said, because that's the expectation of a child. A Rav should sleep Shabbos afternoon. He understood that it would be a Chilul Hashem for him to sleep Shabbos afternoon. Isn't that an amazing story?
Yep. Poor guy.
So what happened to the Shabbos Shloh?
He did. He did.
It's a frightening story to tell when Shabbos ends so late.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. But in any case, the small things are a Chilul Hashem. So it's like this. if you are dealing with a fairly sophisticated group of people that are familiar with the Jewish community and they know Torah and they understand human nature, the potential for Chilul Hashem is less. Because listen, I've been around, I've been practicing Judaism for many years, I know my own failings, I know my own shortcomings, I know I'm not perfect. So I see a person do something, I don't say that, this speaks badly about Torah, about Judaism. I understand, nobody's perfect, he made a mistake. I'm not meant to copy him. But if you have that audience which is not so sophisticated, perhaps the person is a convert, he's a newcomer to Judaism. Perhaps the person is just learning about Judaism. This is his introduction to Jewish practice, Jewish life. And again, as I said, he may have a romanticized view. And that's why he wants to join. He wants to join because he knows that this is how Jews act, and Jews do this, and how they speak nicely, how they act nicely, how honest they are in business. And how good they are with their children. They never get angry, and they're always patient, and everything, never get upset about their children. So everything is peaceful. So and then all of a sudden they see that there's the seamy underside of Jewish life. That's not the case. Then that's a real Chilul Hashem. So the Sforno says like this: if a person steals from a native-born Jew, it's not a Chilul Hashem. It's not a Chilul Hashem. It's a crime of theft. It's a terrible sin. But it doesn't have that element of Chilul Hashem. You steal from the convert, that's an element of Chilul Hashem. That's an element, you've desecrated God's name because you've shattered their illusions. Now, I mentioned recently a very interesting thing. We all have the potential to make a Kiddush Hashem and to make a Chilul Hashem. We all encounter many people who need to be brought back to Judaism. So what can we do to make a Kiddush Hashem? And what can we do, God forbid, to make a Chilul Hashem? So it's a pretty simple thing. If a person shows that the religious life is stressful, if the person shows that he's tormented, he's agonizing, he's frustrated, there's no greater Chilul Hashem than that. Who would want to join a community of people who are tormented, who are pained, who are frustrated, who are just neurotic while living up to their religious obligation? But on the other hand, if you are happy and joyous and contented, and you walk around with a smile on your face and you show that my Jewish practice, my Torah study gives me satisfaction and happiness and joy, that's a Kiddush Hashem. Because everyone wants happiness. Who doesn't want to be happy? So if I would meet a person, and this person would be so happy, so content, and I say, why are you so, you're such a happy person, why are you so happy? And you say, I did mitzvah, I did Torah today. I say, boy, where do I sign? I want to do that too. I also want to be happy. Right? Well, I see a person, you're so pained. You're so miserable. Like, what happened? He says, I was cleaning for Pesach. So okay, who needs it? Who needs it? So you have to understand that we have the potential to create this type of Kiddush Hashem, Chilul Hashem. I want to point out an amazing thing. BaMidbar Parshas Naso talks about the array of the machna, of the camp. And the camp is a very organized, it's an organized system. Each shevet has its place. We know that the converts were not a part of the machna. You may remember this from the story of the Makalel, the person who cursed God. Remember, why did he curse God? He really was not a member of any tribe, because although his mother was a Jewess, his father was an Egyptian, and tribal status is conferred by the father. So he had no place in the machna, and in frustration he cursed God. So the machna excludes the converts. The Erev Rav was not included in the machna. Now sometimes when you create a structure, there is a tendency to focus inward. Because what is really important, what's important is what the insiders think. What the outsiders think isn't important. That's why the Torah in Parshas Noso, after it completes the story of the Machana, talks about first the mitzvah of Shiluach Tmeim, that the impure people have to be sent outside of the Machana, their laws. The Machana has to be kept pure. But at the same time, it speaks about Gezel Hagir, which is that our focus, even as we set up the Machana, we have to be focused not only inward but outward as well. We have to understand that we have the potential to create a Chilul Hashem among all those that are around us. And this is a very important thing to know. You want to practice outreach. A smile is the greatest advertisement for your religion. And a frown is the greatest advertisement for some other religion, not your own. Okay, having said that, let's turn back to our parsha. So we have a question. Why are the Asafsif, why is the Erev Rav all of a sudden complaining? Now, the first misowner, and we understand why they're complaining. They're complaining because they're complaining about the journey. But what is the Erev Rav complaining about? The food? They've been eating one for over a year already. The answer is this. The answer is that you know why the Erev Rav was complaining now? Because the Jews are complaining now. Because if the Jews had been contented, if the Jews had been happy, if the Jews had said that whatever we are suffering, whatever physical difficulty there is worthwhile, because we're God's people and we're going to Eretz Yisrael and we're going to come to the promised land, then the Erev Rav wouldn't have complained either. They wouldn't have said, oh, we remember how great it was in Egypt. But if the Jews are complaining, if they're dissatisfied, so the Erev Rav says, so what did we come here for? So now they're beginning to regret the decision they had made more than a year before. But why? Because if the Jews are complaining, if they don't feel it's worth the sacrifice, why is it worth our sacrifice? And that's a terrible, terrible thing. But that's the connection of the stories. That's why there's no space, there's no separation between two paragraphs. This is an amazing, amazing, amazing thing. In other words, when the Jews complain, that's when the converts complain. Because if the Jews feel that being God's people, the spiritual advantages, don't justify the physical discomfort, so they says, so what are we doing here? These are the insiders. They don't believe it, so we should believe it. So until now they didn't complain. But now that the Jews are complaining, and the Jews, we know why they're complaining just now, because it's the weariness of the road. So therefore, that's why the Erev Rav also complains. And once the Erev Rav complains, it becomes contagious, and the Jews complain about that too, about the food. But it starts with the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav complained because the native Jews complained. That's the connection of the stories. Yes?
For both groups of complainers, did Hashem later on give them different consequences? Or did they have similar consequences?
No, it's outlined in great detail. There were terrible consequences for both. Right? Different ones, appropriate for the situation. But I'm just pointing out this one thing, that the Erev Rav may not be 100% to blame here. That there may be something that the Jews are responsible for. Now, I just want to point out one last thing. I'll take questions after this. When I get this in, that there's an amazing Meshech Chochmah, and the Meshech Chochmah explains why the Jews might have been complaining just at this time. Now, we said, according to Rashi, they were complaining because they began traveling. But the Meshech Chochmah points out something, and it'll fall into place if we see this little point. Now, there is a chronological problem in the book of BaMidbar. You know, the beginning of BaMidbar starts on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. That's when the census was taken. The first day of Iyar, a year and 2 weeks after the Yetzias Mitzrayim. Then in Parshas Noso, we have a chain of Parshias, which according to Chazal took place on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 1 month before. So for example, the dedication of the Mishkan, which is the end of Parshas Naso, took place Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And then you have at the beginning of Parshas Beha-alotcha, you have the purification of the Leviim, and then you have the breaking of the camp on the 20th of Iyar. Now, that parsha, the purification of the Leviim, that is not clear when that took place. Is that one of the parshias that took place in Nisan? Is that one of the parshias that took place in Iyar? It's not clear. There's no date attached to that particular section. So the Meshech Chacham offers a conjecture that now we're going back to Iyar. In other words, although we had a series of parshias that really predate the beginning of the book, the purification of the Leviim took place in Iyar just before the camp broke. So says the Meshech Chachma, an amazing thing. You know why the Jews are complaining? You know why the Jews were complaining? Just at this time? They were complaining because until now, they felt that the spiritual advantages of the Yetzias Mitzrayim justified any physical suffering. But when the Jews saw that they lost their privileges to the Leviim, remember, as a consequence of the golden calf, remember the Jewish firstborn were meant to be the servants in the temple. But when they saw, as a consequence of the sin of the golden calf, that it was taken away from them and given to the Leviim, they began to rethink things through. Now, until the Leviim were actually consecrated, they always had this doubt. Maybe we'll get it back, and maybe it's not final, and maybe, now it is. Even if the verdict is delivered. But you always think, maybe there could be a reprieve, maybe there could be pardoned. But when the purification of Leviim took place, that's when the Jews realized, okay, that's it. That's it. We're not getting this back. And that was a great disillusionment for the Bnei Yisrael.
You mean the firstborn of the
of the Jewish people. In other words, they felt that something was taken away from the other tribes. Shevet Levi now became God's special tribe, and the rest of us are in the doghouse, so to speak. So what would justify the physical suffering? And this is an amazing thing. People are willing to suffer, but for a reason, for something. So if we're going to have the privilege of serving in the temple, our firstborn children, that's one thing. But if really we are now marginalized, now it's Shevet Levi. They're the ones who are dear to God. And the rest of us are just, as I said, in the doghouse. So what's the use? Why should we suffer so? And therefore says the Meshech Chachma, that is why the complaint of the Messiah began just at this time. They're taking it a step further. Now the complaint of the Erev Rav has an even greater poignance. And why are the Jews complaining? The Jews are complaining because they feel that their diminished spiritual advantages don't justify the suffering. So what are we? We have even less than them. So what justifies our suffering? And this is why they complained. Now, again, as I said, whether this is the interpretation, I don't know. I think there are many, many possibilities in the interpretation of a parsha. But I think the point is a valid point in any case. This is something that we all have to know. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, once said like this, when the Jews, the immigrants came before the Second World War, the immigrants that came in the early decades of the 20th century, and many of their children gave up the observance of Shabbos, the observance of mitzvahs. It was hard to hold on. After the Second World War, then already schools were built, and there was an educational infrastructure. But in those first decades, you had many, many, many people. They themselves were very pious and scholarly and learned and observant. They couldn't hold on to their children. And the question is, why was that? Why were they so unsuccessful in transmitting Jewish values to their children? So Rav Moshe once said like this, Jews used to come home, they had a hard life. It was hard. was hard. America was operating on a 6-day work week. There were many people that couldn't find work as Shabbos observers. There were many people that every 2 weeks they found a new job. Because, the first Saturday, maybe he's sick, but when they didn't show up the second Saturday, they were fired. And many people succumbed to the temptation, and they had to work on Shabbos. There was an amazing phenomenon in America at that time. They had early Shabbos morning minyanim. 6 o'clock in the morning. Nowadays, they also have early minyanim. The early minyanim nowadays, people don't want to hear the rabbi's sermon, so they're willing to get up an hour and a half early, to miss the sermon. Which, I don't have any sympathy for, but I understand where they're coming from. But in those days, these were people that went to work. They went to work. So they would go to shul, Shabbos, and they daven and kriyas Torah and everything, and then they'd go to work. And it's hard to judge, but this was a catastrophe. But these people were bitter, and it was very difficult for them. And they would come home, and they would say, "It's schwer zu sein a Yid." It's difficult to be a Jew. It's difficult. It was difficult. So what was the meta message that was transmitted to the children? So why be a Jew? It reminds me. My mother tells me that back in the olden days, sometimes I misbehaved. My father had to punish me. So my father would always precede the punishment with a little sermonette, and he would say, "This hurts me more than it'll hurt you." So my mother says, I answer back, "So why do it? Why do you want to torture yourself?" But the point is, the kids got this message. So it's so hard to be a Jew. So why be a Jew? So Moshe said that if parents would have come home, and they would have said, "What a joy it is to be a Jew. What a joy it is to be a Jew." They would have been more successful in transmitting Jewish values to the next generation. So therefore, we have to avoid the same trap. Baruch Hashem, for us, it's so much easier. I don't know what America has today. Is it a 4-day work week, a 3-day work week, or a 0-day work week? I don't know what we have. But it seems to me that Baruch Hashem, keeping Shabbos is not an obstacle, and keeping kosher is not an obstacle, and you can get virtually everything and anything you could possibly want in the kosher version. We don't have those challenges that once were the case. So we have to serve the Ribbono Shel Olam, b'simcha, b'tuv leva, with joy and good-heartedness. And if we do that, then we are a walking advertisement for our faith. In other words, if we, on the other hand, put on a sour face, we're making a chilul Hashem of tremendous magnitude, because everybody we encounter will say, "Well, I want to be like that." Who wants to be like that? Think about it. Imagine, a family, right, where the parents are always fighting. Why should the children want to get married? For what? They see this is what it's like. So, we have to know that we are sending messages to everybody we encounter, whether it's our children, whether it's our neighbors, whether it's our co-workers, etc. If we send positive messages, we're making a Kiddush Hashem. We send negative messages, we're making a Chilul Hashem. I think that may be an interpretation of this parasha. Okay, thank you very much.